Hey there! I'm Connor and welcome back to Most Amazing. Growing up in Scouts, one of my most favorite things in the world was the bonfires at camp. We would do skits and sing songs, but the best part for me was always the ghost stories. And as an avid horror movie fan now that I'm supposedly grown up, there are so many ghost stories I heard as a kid that I would love to see on the screen. So today, I've collected some of the scariest ones I know and made a list of the top 10 unsettling horror stories that need to be turned into movies. Are there any scary stories you heard growing up? Let me know in the comments below. Now, turn the lights out, grab some popcorn, because here we go. Number 10. Click, click, slide. One night in a small town not too far from where you are now, a woman, Sally, was late to pick up her daughter from a school basketball game. The reason she was late was because she'd stopped to get a manicure and long new acrylic nails put on at the salon. While she was rushing to the school, her car stalled out on the train tracks, and suddenly she saw a bright light and heard the train's horn as it collided with her car. The car was destroyed, and the only piece of her body that was found were her legs. The whole town was abuzz the next day with the mystery of what had happened, but at 6:30, the same time the train killed Sally, all of the young people in the town heard three strange noises. Click, click, slide, over and over again. It seemed to move all the way from one side of town to the other, from the train tracks to the school. Originally, people were wary of what was going on, so they walked together in groups, but every night they heard it. Click, click, slide. And after a while, the townspeople were terrified, and no one went outside alone after dark, especially if you weren't a grown-up. One night, young Emma was sitting in her living room with her mother when her mom asked her, "Emma, I haven't been feeling well. Would you go to the store and pick up some medicine for me?" Emma looked worried and said, "But Mom, it's almost 6:30. And her mother shrugged it off, saying it's just an old story and that she needed to grow up. So off Emma went to the store, but on her way back, as night fell, sure enough she heard the noise. Click, click, slide. Click, click, slide. And she looked behind her but saw nothing. She quickened her pace as she walked home, and behind her, getting louder, click, click, slide. And as she got closer to home, the sounds were practically in her ear. Click, click, slide. And as she reached her front door, she turned around to see the mangled torso of a woman dragging herself with her long nails along the ground towards her. Click, click, slide. Emma pounded on the door and begged to be let inside, but her mother had locked the door and fallen asleep. And behind her, louder than ever, she heard click, click, slide. The next morning, the mother couldn't find Emma, and when she opened the front door to look for her, all that she saw was a trail of blood going down the stairs, and a message scrawled in blood on the front steps that read, "Why didn't you open the door, Mother?" I can already imagine the special effects makeup on Sally. Number 9. The Keyhole. Our next tale is a bit more simple and would be some slow build horror for sure, but some of my favorite scary movies are like that. A man comes into town on business. All of the hotels in the area are booked up for the holidays, so he decides to check into a less than savory hotel, as it's the only one with a vacancy sign on. When the front desk worker gives him his key, she says that on his floor there is a locked room with no number on it, and that he must stay out of it at all costs. Agreeing, he heads to his room, and as he does, he walks by the room with no number. He almost knocks, but decides against it and goes to bed. The next night, as he's returning to his room, he walks by the door and sees that the keyhole is rather wide, as though the lock was from a very long time ago. And he crouches down and looks inside. He sees a room much like his own, but in the back corner, there's a woman with skin as white as snow, crying with her head against the wall. He almost knocks, but decides against it. The next night, the man decides to look through the keyhole one more time to check on the woman, but all he sees when he looks through is the color red. She must have blocked the door with a red scarf or tape or something, he thinks to himself. When he checks out, he confesses to the front desk worker that he'd looked through the keyhole into the room. She sighs and tells him that they don't rent the room anymore because a man murdered his wife in there many years ago. And when the police found her body, she'd been strangled and beaten so hard that her eyes had filled with blood, and they turned completely red. Number 8. The King of Hearts. Modern playing cards are filled with meanings and symbols based in truth, like the 4 suits being representative of the 4 seasons, or the 52 cards representing the number of weeks in the year. And the kings are all based on real rulers, and the King of Hearts represents the emotionally disturbed Charles VII of France. King Charles fell ill near the end of his life, and it was at this time that he became obsessed with numerology and playing cards, as he knew his face was already immortalized in their ink. He began to obsess over the fact that the king was the 13th card of any suit, and that it would bring him terrible misfortune. He started to see the number everywhere, and it eventually drove him mad. One day, one of his butlers went to the king's room to feed him, and found King Charles wielding a sword, proclaiming that the cards have shown me the truth length of 13, and it's not meant for mortal eyes. And he then thrust the sword into the left side of his head, and it came out on the other side. His playing card was changed to depict the grisly way he died, and check for yourself. On many decks of cards, the King of Hearts has a sword in the left side of his head. It's even creepier that he chose to end his life on 7/6/1462, with 7 and 6 making 13, and the numbers of the year also adding up to 13. Makes you wonder if the number really did have some strange power. Number 7. The Cremation of Sam McGee. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake LaBarge where I cremated Sam McGee. This is the beginning of one of my most favorite poems of all time. Written by Robert W. Service, this creepy poem tells the story of two men who are on an Arctic expedition, and unfortunately, Sam passes away from the cold. The poem follows Sam's friend's journey, bringing his frozen, dead body through the ice and snow to fulfill Sam's last wish, to be cremated, so that he could feel like he's warm and back at home in the South one last time. I won't spoil the rest, but I believe that there's enough of a story to make a movie here. To be following one man's struggle through the Arctic to see his friend's dying wish come true would be a pretty compelling film, not to mention the unexpected twists. Johnny Cash actually does a fantastic reading of it if you're so inclined to listen. Number 6. A Ride Home. Now there are many different versions of this story, and some of them have been documented in real life by real people. One version is called The Witch of White Rock Lake. Another is called The Lady in White, but as the story goes, one night a woman was driving home after a long night shift, and due to some rain, the main road was out, so she needed to take a detour down an old dirt road that goes by the lake. As she's driving, she suddenly sees a woman in a white dress standing in the middle of the road. She stops the car, and as the woman in white approaches, she sees that they are absolutely drenched, head to toe. The woman comes to the window and, weeping, she asks for a ride home, saying that her boat capsized on the lake and that she needs to get home to her family. The driver says, "Of course, get in and tell me where you need to go." The lady in white gets in the back seat and gives her an address. It's not too far from where they are now, and they drive off into the night. After a little while, the driver asks for some clarification on the directions, but when she turns around, the woman is nowhere to be seen, but the seat is soaking wet. She decides to finish the journey to the address and arrives at a house. She knocks on the door and a man answers. She tells him about the woman in white and how she gave her this address and then disappeared. The man said, "You're the 5th person to knock on my door and tell me this story. 5 years ago tonight, my wife and I were sailing on the lake and we had a terrible accident and she drowned. She's been pleading for help ever since." Number 5. The Seventh Barn. Now, I think that this next one could be great on the silver screen, but not necessarily because of how scary it is, but because you could lean into the investigation angle and how obsession can drive people to do all sorts of crazy things. There was once a wealthy farmer who loved his wife so much that he bought her a heck of a lot of land as a wedding present. When they had a child, the husband decided to celebrate the occasion by building a barn and putting a plaque on it with their name. Every time the man and his wife had a child, he did this, and eventually they had 6 barns and 6 children, and they were happy. When his wife announced that she was pregnant again, he was overjoyed and began construction on the 7th barn, and the day that he finished, she went into labor. Unfortunately, his wife died in childbirth, and so did their unborn son. Driven mad by grief and heartbreak, the man took the rest of his family out to the 7th barn to bury his wife and son, he told them. But then, he took an axe and killed all of them and hung himself from the rafters. They say if you visit the barn at night, you can see his ghostly figure hanging by his neck, blowing in the wind. And over the years, the land and barns were sold off, all but the 7th, as everyone knew of the tragedy that happened there. But a teacher told his son the scary story, and they decided to try to find the 7th barn. They scoured old maps, toured through the countryside and plains, and finally found what they thought was the 7th barn. It even had the nameplate on the outside, and they headed out there with a video camera to get some paranormal evidence. The next morning, the teacher's wife reported the son and husband missing, and the cops found their car abandoned on the side of the road near a barn. And when they looked inside, they saw their bodies hung by the neck from the rafters, blowing in the wind. Number 4. Knock. Now, making this next one into a feature-length film would be interesting, not necessarily because of the content, but for the lack thereof. This was published in 1948, written by an author named Frederick Brown, and it's not your normal ghost story, but the shortest horror story ever written. To make this a movie, I think you'd have to start long before the events take place and build the world up. It's only 2 sentences, and it goes like this. The last man on earth sat alone at the room. There was a knock on the door. Simple, short, and spooky. Number 3. Lick. One night, a young woman was home alone. Her roommates were out of town for the night, and she had the run of the place. She watched TV and ate junk food all evening, but when the night came, there was a terrible thunderstorm, and despite the fact that she should have grown out of it, she was still afraid of the dark, and the shadows, lightning, and noises in an empty house scared her half to death. Luckily, she had her faithful dog Spot to take care of her, and he curled up next to her on the bed and licked her hand to comfort her, and she fell asleep. In the middle of the night, she woke up to a noise, something that was dripping. Maybe some rain was leaking in, or a tap wasn't fully off, but she heard it loud and clear. Drip, drip, drip. The lightning and shadows and sounds scared her, but Spot licked her hand for comfort and she fell back asleep. An hour later, she woke up and heard the noise again. Drip, drip, drip. She wondered if she should go check on it, but she was too frightened from the shadows and the lightning. Spot licked her hand for comfort, and again she fell asleep. She woke one more hour later to the same noise. Drip, 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 and this time she gathered her courage and went to investigate. She followed the sound around her house until she realized it was coming from the bathroom, which she must have left the tap on. She opened the door and saw something horrible. Spot was hanging upside down from the shower rod, and he had been skinned. There was still some blood falling from his body, hitting the floor with a drip, drip, drip. Terrified, she ran back to her room to call the police, but inside she saw a note scrawled on the wall in blood, and it said, "Humans can lick too." As someone who grew up with a dog that slept on their bed, this one terrified me, and I'd like to see it on the big screen. Number 2, Red Ribbon. Now this one was probably one of my favorite horror stories growing up, as it was featured in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Although it was a green ribbon, I prefer it with red. I'm not sure if it's the scariest, but there's a lot of stuff that you could take from here to make a pretty compelling movie. Bill loved Sally with all of his heart, common name for horror stories I guess, but there was always something off about her. Even as he fiddled with the engagement ring in his pocket, he thought so. And every day, no matter what, she had a red ribbon tied around her neck. He proposed and she accepted, and later he asked about the ribbon, and she replied with, "Bill, I must never take off my red ribbon, and if you love me, you'll never ask me about it again." And he left it alone. Over the years, he bought her many beautiful outfits, but no matter what she was wearing, even on their wedding day, she wore the red ribbon tied neatly in a bow around her neck. And the question began to eat away at him. On their anniversary, he bought her a beautiful necklace, thinking that she would have to remove the ribbon to wear it, but when he went to remove it so he could put the necklace around her neck, she said, "The necklace is beautiful and she'll treasure it forever, but I must never take off my red ribbon." This angered him slightly, but he let it go. When their baby was born, it was the happiest moment of his life, but the question came back to him when the baby reached his hand towards the thing tied around its mother's neck, and Sally said sweetly to her new baby, "No, Mommy must never take off her red ribbon." Many nights later, the question he was never to ask had burrowed deep into his mind, and it was driving him mad. So while Sally was sleeping, he slowly reached over and pulled at both sides of the bow on the pretty red ribbon. And just as it finally came loose, Sally's eyes opened and her head rolled off of her neck and onto the floor. With a single tear rolling down her cheek, she cried, "I warned you." And finally, number 1, don't turn on the light. I think this one is so scary because for some reason it feels the most realistic, and I can already see the trailer in my head. Miranda and Lucy were roommates and went to school at the local college. One night Lucy comes home and tells Miranda that they've been invited to a big party and that they need to get ready to go. Miranda says she's not feeling well and that she's gonna have a nap on the couch instead. Lucy heads to the party, but halfway through her walk she realizes she's forgotten her keys. Classic Lucy. When she gets back to her apartment, she opens the very creaky door slowly so that she doesn't make too much noise. She can hear steady, slow breaths, so she decides to not turn on the light so she doesn't wake up her sleeping friend. She knows the place like the back of her hand, so it's no problem. She walks through the apartment in the dark, quietly, grabs her keys, and heads back out the door to the party. She dances all night, and later, exhausted, she walks back up the stairs to her apartment and sees the door wide open. She runs inside but can't see anything in the dark, so she flicks the switch on the wall, and when the room brightens, she sees Miranda, mangled and covered in blood in the middle of the floor. Lucy lets out a blood-curdling scream, and then she sees the mirror on the wall, and on it was a message scrawled in Miranda's blood, "Aren't you glad you didn't turn on the lights?" Well, that's all I have for you today. Hope I didn't scare you too bad. I'm Connor, stay amazing, and I'll see you next time.